My mother never said she loved my brother more. She didn't have to. Love shows itself in 1,000 small ways, in who gets defended first, in whose mistakes are forgiven faster, in who is allowed to fail loudly while the other learns to disappear quietly. Aspen was 6 years older than me, old enough to remember a time before my father, Kiara Sebastian, entered our lives, old enough to be cherished for surviving whatever came before. I was born into stability, into comfort, into a family that already had a hierarchy. And I was never at the top of it. If Aspen forgot his homework, my mother laughed and said he was creative. If I forgot mine, she sighed and asked why I was always so careless. At family dinners, Aspen spoke without being interrupted. I learned to wait for permission, sometimes it never came. I told myself it didn't matter, that love didn't have to be equal to be real. But late at night, lying in bed, I'd replay moments I couldn't unsee, the way she touched his shoulder when he spoke, the way her voice softened when she said his name, the way she corrected me in public but praised him in private. I wasn't jealous. I was observant. And even then, I understood something most children don't. Love isn't missing, it's redistributed. Aspen had the kind of confidence that comes from being chosen early. He walked like the world would adjust around him, and most of the time it did. Teachers loved him, family friends admired him, my mother defended him like it was her full-time job. Even when he was wrong, especially when he was wrong, she found explanations that made his behavior sound noble. He's just passionate, she'd say. When Aspen failed a math test, my mother hired a tutor and blamed the school. When I brought home straight A's, she nodded once and asked if I'd considered drama class. Aspen was never asked to be anything other than himself. I, on the other hand, was constantly being reshaped. Smile more. Speak softer. You'd be beautiful on screen. You shouldn't hide behind numbers. I didn't hate Aspen, that would have been too easy. He didn't ask to be favored. He simply accepted what was handed to him, love, protection, opportunity, without ever checking who paid the price. That's the thing about golden children. They shine so brightly that no one notices the shadow they cast. And I lived in that shadow long enough to learn how to move quietly inside it. My mother, Cordelia, didn't neglect me. She managed me. She monitored my expressions, my interests, my choices. She praised me when I performed the version of myself she preferred, charming, expressive, decorative. And when I stepped outside that frame, she grew cold in a way that never looked cruel to outsiders. It was subtle, strategic. When I said I wanted to study finance, she laughed like I'd told a joke. You're too soft for that world, she said. You have presence, emotion, acting would suit you. Suit me. Not what do you want, Kiara. Not what excites you. Just this is where I can place you. I started noticing how often she spoke for me in rooms I was standing in, how she reframed my opinions to sound smaller, how she praised Aspen's ambition but warned me about mine. She didn't fear my failure. She feared my independence. And once I saw that, I stopped sharing my thoughts freely. I answered questions carefully. I smiled when expected. I learned the art of being underestimated. Because when people stop watching closely, they reveal everything. My father was different. Kiara Sebastian didn't speak often, but when he did, it was deliberate. He watched people the way investors watch markets, quietly, patiently, without emotion clouding the numbers. He never pushed me toward his world, he simply left the door open. When I told him I wanted to study finance, he didn't smile. He didn't celebrate, he just nodded once and said, "Good, learn how money moves, it explains people." My mother was furious. She said I was wasting my looks, that acting would make me visible, that finance was rigid, dull, unkind to women like me. What she meant was, finance would make me powerful in ways she couldn't supervise. I stayed with my decision. I worked harder than I ever had before, numbers made sense when people didn't. Systems had rules, outcomes had logic. I found comfort in that. And slowly I realized something else. My father was watching me the same way he watched deals, not with sentiment but with trust. That scared my mother more than rebellion ever could. After college, I went to work for my father. Not as a favor, not as a symbol. I started at the bottom. I learned how contracts were structured, how risk was calculated, how silence could be more powerful than confrontation. My mother smiled in public and criticized in private. She's wasting her youth, she told friends. She should be seen, not hidden behind a desk. My father never contradicted her aloud. But sometimes, when we were alone, he'd ask me questions no one else bothered to ask. What I thought about a partnership, whether a number felt off, if I trusted a particular advisor. He didn't correct me when I was wrong, he let me discover it. That was his gift. Looking back, I realize he was preparing me not for success, but for survival. Because some people don't destroy you with violence. They destroy you with smiles, paperwork, and assumptions. And my father knew exactly who I was surrounded by. The call came at 6:12 a.m. Hospitals have a way of draining warmth from words. The nurse's voice was calm, practiced, careful. By the time she finished speaking, my body had already gone numb. My father was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no final wisdom, just absence, sudden and absolute. At the hospital, my mother collapsed into grief so theatrical it pulled attention away from everything else. People rushed to comfort her. Aspen stood beside her, stunned but steady, already assuming the position he always had center stage. I stood slightly behind them. No one noticed when I didn't cry right away. Grief hit me later in quieter waves, in the pause before sleep, in the empty office chair that still smelled like my father's cologne. As the arrangements were made, Cordelia took charge. She spoke for the family. She handled the lawyers. She made decisions with a confidence that felt rehearsed. Too rehearsed. Something about her urgency unsettled me. It wasn't grief driving her. It was momentum. And momentum always has a destination. The funeral was flawless. Black attire, controlled emotions, the right people in the right seats. Cordelia cried at the appropriate moments, dabbing her eyes delicately, never smudging her makeup. Aspen gave a short speech about legacy and family. His voice cracked on cue. People nodded, impressed by his composure. I said nothing. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. I let them make that mistake. After the service, conversations shifted quickly from condolences to curiosity. People wanted to know what would happen to the company, to the assets, to the future. Cordelia answered smoothly. Joshua had everything arranged, she said. We're meeting the lawyer soon. The word soon echoed in my head. My father hated haste. He believed rushing decisions invited mistakes. Yet here she was, accelerating everything. That night I lay awake replaying the day. Her tears, her tone, the way she squeezed Aspen's hand whenever someone important walked by. Grief doesn't calculate. But she was calculating something. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and expensive coffee. Cordelia sat confidently, already familiar with the process. Aspen leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, relaxed in a way that suggested expectation. I sat straight, listening. The lawyer began reading the will. At first it sounded normal, assets divided, responsibilities outlined, trusts mentioned. But as the details unfolded, something felt off. Not wrong enough to object, just unfamiliar. My father was precise, almost obsessive. He double-checked figures, reworded clauses, anticipated loopholes. This will felt simplified. When the lawyer mentioned changes made shortly before my father's death, Cordelia didn't flinch. Aspen didn't question it. I did. When were these revisions made? I asked. The lawyer smiled politely. Within the last month. That was impossible. My father hadn't altered major documents in years without discussing them with me. He believed transparency prevented conflict. I said nothing more. But in my head, alarms were already screaming. I stayed behind after the meeting. Cordelia and Aspen left together, discussing celebratory dinner plans, too soon, too easily. The lawyer began organizing his papers, movements quick, practiced. You handled that well, he said to me. Many children become emotional. Children. I studied him carefully. His suit was expensive, his smile professional. But there was tension behind his eyes, the kind that appears when someone is managing more than legal responsibility. My father trusted you, I said casually. Very much, he replied, a beat too fast. I asked a few more questions, harmless ones, procedural ones. Each answer was smooth. Too smooth. When I left the office, I didn't feel relief, I felt certainty. Someone was lying. And liars always underestimate silence because silence doesn't contradict them. It lets them talk. That night, I went through my father's old files. Not the obvious ones, not the documents Cordelia had access to. I searched the forgotten folders, archived emails, outdated drafts, notes my father never deleted. That's where I found it. A reference to another law firm. Not recent, not prominent, just a quiet mention in an email sent months earlier. No explanation, no context. My father never did anything without purpose. I didn't confront anyone, I didn't ask questions. I made one phone call. And when the voice on the other end confirmed my father's name and asked how I'd found them, I knew something much bigger was unfolding. The lie wasn't just in the will. It was in who thought they were in control. Once I confirmed the second law firm existed, I changed my behavior. Not dramatically, dramatic changes attract attention. I became softer, quieter, I asked fewer questions and agreed too easily. I let Cordelia believe grief had dulled my sharpness. She relaxed almost immediately. People like her mistake silence for surrender. They assume if you aren't resisting, you're compliant. That belief made her careless. Aspen started making plans openly, upgrades, expansions, lifestyle changes. He talked about the company like it already belonged to him. I nodded, smiled, took notes. Every time Cordelia spoke about family unity, I felt the weight of the performance. She had never cared about unity before, only control. And control, once achieved, always reveals arrogance. I didn't confront them because confrontation would warn them. I needed them confident. The second law firm didn't rush me. That was how I knew my father had chosen them intentionally. They asked careful questions, requested proof of identity, verified timelines. They didn't promise outcomes, they explained processes. One of the partners, an older woman with calm eyes, told me something I'll never forget. Your father prepared for conflict, not harmony. They showed me drafts, archived correspondence, legal instructions dated long before his illness. My father had documented everything. Not emotionally, methodically. He had anticipated pressure, manipulation, even forgery. I felt grief twist into something sharper. This wasn't paranoia. It was foresight. And he'd left me a map. They didn't give me the will immediately. They explained timing, legal exposure, consequences. They also asked if anyone else knew about them. No, I said. That answer mattered. They told me my father had insisted on video documentation for critical changes, not as sentiment, as evidence. When they asked if I wanted to see it, I hesitated. Some truths change you. But I nodded. Because I was already changing. My father appeared on the screen, older, tired, but focused. He spoke calmly, clearly. He stated names, dates, intentions. He acknowledged the possibility of interference. He didn't accuse. He prepared. Watching him felt like being spoken to across time, like he knew exactly who would try to reshape his absence. When the video ended, the room was silent. No one rushed me. They let me breathe. I understood then, my father hadn't chosen me because I was loved less by others. He chose me because I paid attention. After that, everything became easier. I attended meetings with lowered eyes. I deferred decisions. I let Cordelia interrupt me. I let Aspen dismiss me. They grew bolder. Cordelia began hosting guests. Aspen spoke about leadership publicly. The lawyer called more often, too often, his voice tight with reassurance. They were celebrating early. I was documenting everything. Every email, every statement, every assumption. Revenge doesn't require rage. It requires patience. And by then, I had more than enough. Cordelia stopped pretending to be careful. She began issuing instructions instead of suggestions. She rearranged offices, reassigned assistants, even spoke to my father's longtime partners as if she'd always held authority. No one challenged her. Grief buys temporary obedience. She invited me to lunches that felt like evaluations, asked leading questions, tested my loyalty in subtle ways. "Your father trusted me," she said once, stirring her tea. "You know that, right?" I nodded. Trust, I'd learned, is often claimed by the unworthy. Her confidence was intoxicating to her. She mistook silence for agreement and compliance for ignorance. That mistake would cost her everything. Aspen announced his intentions at a board meeting. He spoke about vision, growth, legacy. He used my father's phrases, the ones he never fully understood, and wore a suit tailored too sharply for mourning. When someone asked about my role, he smiled kindly. "Kiara prefers analysis," he said. "She's not interested in leadership." I met his eyes and smiled back. Because he was right. I wasn't interested in leadership. I was interested in outcomes. After the meeting, Cuddler hugged him like he'd won something already. They were building a future on an assumption. Documents began appearing. Authorizations, transfers, confirmations. Cuddler framed them as formalities. Aspen pushed them as efficiency. The lawyer sent follow-up emails laced with urgency. I declined everything. Politely, calmly, with excuses that sounded reasonable. "I'd like more time. I want to understand the implications. I'm not ready." Each delay frustrated them. Delay is dangerous when you're hiding something. They began pushing me harder. That's when I knew the clock was working in my favor. The lawyer called me late one evening. His tone was strained, friendly but brittle. "These processes can't stay open forever," he said. "It's in everyone's best interest to conclude things." Best interest? I asked him a simple question. "Why does the will you read differ from my father's archived drafts?" Silence. Not denial, not confusion. Silence. Then excuses, procedural language, legal fog. He was unraveling. People who lie professionally fear exposure more than consequence. And fear makes them sloppy. The second law firm called me first. Everything was ready. Evidence verified, timelines matched, legal protections in place. All that remained was presentation. Cuddler scheduled another meeting, confident, commanding, final. Aspen looked victorious, the lawyer looked nervous. I walked in empty-handed. No documents, no notes. Just patience. Because the truth doesn't rush. It waits for the room to fill. This time the room was different. There were more people, new lawyers, observers Cuddler hadn't invited, faces she didn't recognize and couldn't control. She noticed immediately. Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. Aspen shifted in his chair, the lawyer avoided my eyes. The senior partner from the second firm introduced herself calmly and explained why the meeting was necessary. Her voice carried authority, not aggression, just certainty. Then she began to read. Clause by clause. Slowly. The words weren't dramatic, they didn't need to be. Because each sentence dismantled the story Cuddler had been telling herself. No one interrupted. No one argued. Cuddler sat rigid, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Aspen stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The lawyer's breathing became audible, shallow, uneven. I said nothing. There is a moment when people realize control has slipped from their hands. It doesn't look like panic at first. It looks like disbelief. They were still waiting for someone to stop it. No one did. The screen descended. My father appeared. He spoke without emotion, without bitterness. He explained his intentions clearly. He named risks without assigning blame. He acknowledged the possibility of interference. He confirmed his decisions. When the video ended, the room stayed quiet. Cuddler didn't cry. Aspen didn't speak. The lawyer closed his eyes. Truth doesn't need emphasis. It only needs space. That was the strangest part. Not anger, not accusations. No one looked at me. Kiara stared at the table. Aspen studied the wall, the lawyer focused on nothing at all. I wasn't triumphant. I was resolved. This wasn't about winning. It was about clarity. And clarity leaves no room for performance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I thanked the lawyers and stood up. As I walked out, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd taken something from them, but because I no longer needed their approval. My father had trusted me with the truth. That was the inheritance. Everything else was just paper. After the meeting, life didn't explode. It slowed. That's what surprised me most. No shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations, just distance, thick, uncomfortable distance that settled into every shared space. Kiara stopped speaking to me unless absolutely necessary, not out of anger but calculation, like she was reassessing a problem she'd underestimated. Aspen avoided me entirely. He used to fill rooms with noise. Now he moved carefully, like someone afraid of triggering something invisible. People think revenge ends with exposure. It doesn't. It begins with adjustment. And they were adjusting to a reality where I was no longer controllable. Kiara changed tactics. One morning, she knocked on my door. She sat on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was a child. Her voice softened. Her eyes looked tired instead of sharp. "I never meant for things to become so complicated," she said. That was her apology. Not I was wrong. Not I hurt you. Just this is inconvenient. She spoke about family, about healing, about moving forward. I listened politely. Then I said nothing. Silence unnerves people who rely on emotional leverage. She left the room unsettled, and I knew she wouldn't try that approach again. Aspen cornered me in the hallway days later. "You planned this," he said quietly. Not angry, accusing. I looked at him for a long moment. "No," I replied, "I prepared." He scoffed, "You think you're better than us now?" That question revealed everything. This was never about fairness. It was about hierarchy. "I think I'm done pretending," I said. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And that frightened him. Word travels fast in professional circles. Not gossip, information. Partners began reaching out to me directly, not because I demanded authority, but because stability attracts attention. They asked careful questions, they listened to my answers. Kiara noticed. So did Aspen. For the first time, people weren't assuming I was background support. They were recalibrating. Power doesn't announce itself. It shifts quietly, then suddenly feels permanent. The lawyer stopped responding to emails. Then calls. Then he resigned from the firm entirely. No scandal, no announcement, just absence. Kiara pretended not to notice. But absence leaves louder echoes than confrontation ever could. That's when I understood something crucial. I didn't need to pursue justice. Justice had momentum of its own. With the chaos gone, grief finally arrived. Real grief, untangled from suspicion and defense. I visited my father's office alone, sat in his chair, opened his old notebooks. He'd written observations, not emotions. Names, patterns, warnings. He hadn't been cold. He'd been careful. And in that care, he'd protected me. I cried for the first time without fear of being watched. Cordelia tried once more. This time with lawyers. Not to overturn the will, she knew better now, but to negotiate influence. Roles, visibility, image. She framed it as cooperation. I declined. Calmly, professionally. That refusal ended something between us. Not loudly, but completely. Revenge didn't feel like victory. It felt like space. Mental space, emotional space, breathing room. No more anticipating manipulation, no more minimizing myself. I wasn't lighter because I'd won. I was lighter because I'd stopped carrying other people's expectations. That's the part no one talks about. I didn't dismantle the family. I restructured my involvement. Boundaries replaced proximity, distance replaced obligation. Aspen moved on, Cordelia retreated into social appearances. I kept my father's principles. That was enough. People still ask how I did it. What strategy I used. What trick I played. The truth disappoints them. I watched. I listened. I waited. I didn't become ruthless. I became precise. And the daughter they underestimated quietly became the woman they couldn't move. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't shout. I didn't expose them publicly. I let the truth do what it always does, arrive on time. Some people think revenge has to be loud to be satisfying. But sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away with clarity, dignity, and your future intact. So tell me, was I justified? Would you have stayed silent like I did, or confronted them sooner? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe intelligence beats cruelty every time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story.